Okay, so in the previous video, what we have understood, so we have three major layers, that is presentation layer, business logic layer, and database layer. So the presentation layer part, whatever you are looking at here, so this we call it as front end development. That means front end development will be done by the presentation layer, will be taken care with the front end development team. That means HTML, CSS, JavaScript, or they may use Angular, React framework. So this is like user interface. And the next one is business logic layer. That means here the actual logic, whatever the functionality you are going to develop for the application. Say for example, I wanted to search something in the Amazon website. So when you enter the value in the search box and click on search button, the corresponding information has to come back. So that is called your functionality. That functionality we are going to make use of a backend development team where they might use the programming languages like Java, Python, C, C++, whatever the language is suitable for the requirement, they are going to make use of it and they are going to build the APIs. So that means business logic layer will be used to develop your APIs and backend development team will perform that and they will do the request. The API will go and talk to the database, and from there it will come back to the API as a response. If you are going to check only between your middle layer and database layer. Now, if at all you wanted to do it from the front end layer, that means user where the client, if at all the client wants to do the operation from the this part, and then what will happen from the client side, if the user request anything, that will go through your API and it will go and talk to the database layer, and correspondingly the respective information will pass back through the API and the response will be presented in the presentation layer. So what will happen currently? So this presentation layer may take a certain time and there are so many changes, style sheets, and then look and feel of the application. So if you have to build it a right application, so there are so many reviews needs to be done from the users in the sense your customers here. So what will happen, instead of going with this particular page directly, you can check the main logic. Even though your presentation is layer is not ready, you will be able to test the APIs. That means what is happening, once you before you develop your UI itself, you are going to complete your most of the testing using API testing. So what will happen, once your UI is ready, you will ensure that the UI, that is the user interface, is proper and then it is as per the requirement. And from there also you will try to check whether the application programming interface, the APIs are working properly or not. So this is how you're going to verify your API testing. So first you need to understand what is the tool we are going to use it to test this APIs. So there are so many tools in the market, but you will be using for manual testing, we are going to go with Postman. Postman is one of the famous tool which we are going to use for our API testing. So Postman is for using your manual testing, and you will have rest assured will be used to test your APIs using automation. Okay, so what is that? How to do rest assured testing, that we will discuss later. So for now, we will focus on only Postman. So before I go there, first of all, you need to understand at a high level, there are two types of APIs available. One is SOAP, stands for Simple Object Access Protocol, and another one is REST. Okay, REST, Representational State Transfer. what is this, what is the purpose of this, why do we need to know, all these things you will come to know once you complete this course. So SOAP is like earlier people used to use it. It is very old, and here they used to use XML files for the data communication. So they are going to use XML files. XML stands for extensive markup language. Okay, extensive markup language. If you don't know any of these terms also, it is fine. I will show you each and everything during our course. Every word, whatever we use here, you will get a clear understanding as long as you go through all of our videos. So the next one is REST, where this will use either XMLs or JSON files. Okay. So what will happen when you say XML is little complex compared to your JSON files? So now you will get a question, what is the full form of JSON, right? So JSON means what? JavaScript Object Notation. JavaScript Object Notation. So this is pretty simple. That's the reason most of the people will go with REST. So what is how SOAP will look like, how REST will look like, you will get to know in our subsequent videos. Primarily, we will focus on REST because SOAP is not being used. Most of the organizations, we will be using only REST. That's the reason we will look more on the REST APIs. So now there are two categories at a high level. One is SOAP and another one is REST. And after you understand these two, so now you need to understand what is a web service. So web service is also an API. You can call web service or API. But when you say web service and API are same, then what is the difference between both of them? So that means, as we have discussed in our previous videos, we discussed Google Maps is one of the example which is a public API. That means you can access through internet, right? You will be able to access this API through the internet. But if at all you develop some API which is not accessible for the public users, that means if it is not available for the people to access, then that we call it as APIs. That means APIs means those are not accessible directly. If it is a web service, then you will be able to access publicly. That means all the web services, so you can make a statement using this, all the web services are APIs, but all the APIs are not web services. What does it mean? Your API will be in the local host. That means it will be accessible whatever the server you are accessing. If it is in your premises, that means if it is private and which is not accessible to the end users, accessible for public. So that kind of APIs we call it as private APIs, where you will be simply calling them as APIs, but web services which is available in the public platforms where you can directly make use. So hope you understand the difference between web service and API. So all web services are APIs, but not all the APIs are web services. So this is one more important thing you need to understand. After you understand these terms, now we need to understand what is the methods, what are all the protocol methods. There are two broadly, HTTP and HTTPS. HTTP stands for hypertext transfer protocol, and where hypertext transfer HTTPS means it is hypertext transfer protocol secured. So that means whenever you see any website, whatever the website you take, if it is starting with the HTTP, that means it is not secured. And whenever you see the HTTPS, you will see the website is more secured. So you will be working with both of these categories of website. Most of the organizations, they wanted to have their data and their information of the particular organization to be safer side. Everybody will go with HTTPS protocol only. So there are certain methods you need to understand from HTTP methods, which are very, very important if you wanted to do your postman testing. So when you say postman testing, there are four or five major methods which we use. One is get method. You will have get method, and then post method, and then put method, and then delete. So these are the primary methods which they use as part of postman. And there is one more which is patch. So what is get? Get is used to, you just understand the meaning of this first, and then I will try to see what needs to be done with these methods. Get means retrieve. Post means post means you are going to create a request. So get method is used to retrieve the response. Post method is used to create the request, and then put is used to update the request, and patch is also used to update, but it is you are going to use only for partial update. When you say put, everything will be updated. When you use patch, it will update only partially. How it will happen, what is that, we will see later. And delete, so delete is used to remove the record or delete the request. So this is how you are going to use your postman, and these are the important methods which we use as part of our postman testing. So far you understood what are all the various APIs are available, and what is the difference between web service and your API. And also you have seen HTTP and HTTPS protocol difference. And finally you understood one more thing, like all the HTTP methods, which is your get, and then post, and then put, and then patch, and then delete. So what is the significance of each of these also we have seen. It is very, very important for us to understand few more terminologies before we move on to actual postman setup. So already you know the terminology called URL, stands for uniform resource locator. And there is one more thing called URN, uniform uniform resource name. URI stands for uniform resource identifier. These are all frequently used words as part of your API testing, which are very, very important. URL and URI, both of them are very similar, very most likely the same. I'll give you with an example, and you can understand the difference between both of the URI and URL. And URN stands for Uniform Resource Name, where it is talking about where exactly the endpoint is available. So you need to understand one more word called endpoint. So before I show you this, how a get, post, put, patch, and delete request will look like, first I'll show you that. So to do that, I'm going to open one website, request and response. This is a website which will provide you sample or dummy APIs. Okay, go to this website, and you will see there are so many examples of get, list users, that means it will list out all the users available. Get single user, it will retrieve the single user, and get, it will retrieve again. There is a post method that is used to create, put is used to update, patch is also used to update, delete is used to delete. So if you look at, let me click on get request. See, if you see here, so list users, if I click on this users, if I click this, automatically you see there is a request and there is a response. So the request is the API users page is equal to 2. The page number 2 has these many records. So forget about the JSON file format for now. So it is showing like this, and whatever the data is available, it has provided you in this format. This format we call it as JSON format. We will discuss JSON format separately, but for now, when you click on this get request, what is the request you are sending and what is the response you are getting? So response 200 means it is a successful message where you are able to get the details of this particular users. For example, if I go and click on single resource, single user, click on this, see it will change. API users 2. That means it is getting only the second user information. So now you can see this, there is a curly braces started and curly braces ended, and the data, what is the data we have here? ID, email, first name, last name, and avatar. So whatever the records are there, these are all the labels they are trying to pull that particular user information. So based upon your data, automatically the response has come. So now if you see, if I open this separately, see here, I'm copying this and then I'll put it here. See, this HTTPS, this is your scheme, right? So what is the scheme? What is the protocol you are using? So we call it as scheme, where this will be either HTTP or HTTPS. And then request dot response dot in. Okay, what I'll do, I'll just write this portion, you are calling it as scheme. That means what kind of protocol you are using. And the next one, req dot in. That is your domain or your host. Where did you host your website? And the rest of the portion is your URN. That is uniform resource name. That is your, this part we call it as API /users /2. This we call it as your uniform resource name, and this you can call also as endpoint. Endpoint. So endpoint will never change. Endpoint will never change, but the space, the domain space wherever you are hosting, that may change. So that means for now you have hosted till this part, right? Whatever the part you see here, you can change this location, and this is your path of the API, and you will call this portion as your URN, uniform resource name. Okay, so this is also called as API endpoint. So very important. So if you don't understand these terminologies, you will not be able to understand the subsequent sessions. That's the reason you have to be very clear when you are looking at all these terminologies. So once you are comfortable with these URL, URI, so some people may call this entire part as URL or URI, and some people may exclude this portion and they will say, if at all I have HTTPS and till this part, then I'll call it as URL, and if at all I exclude that portion, this portion, like after this, I'll call it as URI. So anything is fine. So you will be both are same, but every organization, the the way they name it in a different way, but it is okay. So URL and URI are both are same. If somebody is exclusively ask you the difference, you can say that this portion is called URI, and if at all, if you include the protocol, what protocol they're using, then we will call it as HTTP. Yes, if you include that, then it will become your URL. And here if you see, you're trying to pull the user's information. So whatever the functionality you are trying to retrieve, that is your feature. So that means whatever the functionality you are trying to get, the functionality, it could be a search functionality, if it could be a register functionality, it could be a delete functionality, whatever the functionality you are using, you are going to say that that is your feature of that particular resource. What do you mean by resource? Your resource mean whatever the API you are using, your API will have a particular functionality. And also you need to understand one more word called request payload and response payload. So request payload and response payload. What does it mean? When you are sending this request, so what is happening? If you look at this, see, now if at all I have to create, if I go to post and I am going to create one request with the name, let's say I am changing this name to, maybe it is not editable. I'll show you in the postman how can we change the request. Let us say now these people are sending the name and then job. This is your request payload. Once you click on this, automatically whatever the information you are getting back, so this is called response payload, and this is called your request payload. Both of them are very very important. What data you are passing as part of your request, that is your request payload. What information you are getting back from the response, that is your response payload. So all these items we are going to discuss in a detailed manner in our subsequent videos. Okay, so now what exactly we will test as part of your APIs, right? So that is very, very important. So whenever you are sending this kind of request, you are going to send some data. So you are going to send some data and then you will hit the API. And what will happen? You are going to get the response back. That is one kind of testing. And also you will pass the URL. URL means the API URI or URL you are going to send. And also you are going to check the authentication and authorization of the request. That means if you wanted to check some secured protocols, you are going to make sure that you are verifying the authentication and authorization also as part of your API testing. So this is what you are going to verify. You are going to verify the header, and you're going to verify the URL, and then request payload, and then response payload. So all these you will be, most of the people will use a JSON format for these validations, but it is better to have some understanding on XML also. So now once we are clear with all these basic terminologies of API testing and what is the purpose of it, now let's get started in the subsequent videos on the practical implementation of API testing using our Postman.